When you're studying through the Bible and you're looking for the Father and the Son, you come across the book of Daniel. And this is one of the end-time books that even Christ said that we ought to understand. You can see that, of course, in Matthew 24, verse 15. But when we're looking at the book of Daniel, you find the Son of God actually mentioned in Daniel chapter 3. When you understand Daniel chapter 3 in light of what Revelation 13 says, you start to understand that it is an end-time scenario through and through. Here are a couple of points that you'll be able to see and understand for yourself if you go ahead and read those chapters together. In both chapters, you can see that the leadership is speaking as a dragon, or the nation is speaking as a dragon. If you don't worship me, you're going to die. We know, of course, that the enemy is that kind of leader, and speaking as a dragon can certainly involve that if you don't worship according to the dictates of the conscience of the leadership, you will be killed. So you can also see that there is an exercise of all power. You see, Babylon had rulership and leadership of all the world. And we know also in Revelation chapter 13, all the world will wander after the beast. And of course, there's the image to the beast. And you can see in that second beast there of Revelation 13, verses 11 through 18, that's the one that's connected more closely to Daniel chapter 3 compared to the first beast of Revelation 13, verses 1 through 10. So in both chapters, you see an image. There's an image that Nebuchadnezzar the king set up, and there's an image, of course, to the beast in Revelation 13, the second beast. There's fire coming down from heaven in the beast over here in Revelation 13, and there's also fire for the people of God in Daniel chapter 3. Now, we know also that there's deception in both. There's the deception that King Nebuchadnezzar had on the leaders, whether they be the counselors, the sheriffs, the captains, all those people that were invited, the judges and the sheriffs, all of those that were invited to the dedication of the image were commanded thereafter by a herald to worship. And we know that they were deceived in the sense that, wait a minute, we didn't know all this was going on. And so what happened also in Revelation 13 is they were deceived by the miracles that they had the ability to do in the sight of the beast. So we know that there were miracles that were done in both chapters. There was in Daniel chapter 3, there was the miracle of preserving the 3 Hebrews in the fire. And then, of course, the calling down from fire out of heaven in Revelation chapter 13. Now, there were the causing all to worship, both in Daniel 3 and also in Revelation 13. Persecution unto death was found and will be found in both chapters in the fulfillment of Revelation 13, but also we can see in the history of Daniel chapter 3. Now, they both had a deadly wound. Now, what I mean is the deadly wound was given to the 3 Hebrews when they were thrown into the fire. That wound, of course, wasn't able to take the life of those 3 because God had them in his power. We know the deadly wound is referred to, that the deadly wound was healed in Revelation 13, the second beast. And you can say in a sense that the deadly wound was healed as well, or didn't really have the effect that it should, which was a long-lasting death. And so you can kind of parallel those two, but in Daniel chapter 3, there's a remnant, there's a minority. Those few that are faithful, that stand tall upon the foundation of God's rock, his 10 commandments, the character of God, the character of his Son. We also know that there's also the minority that will be alive, those that do not worship the beast, that will be killed, according to verse 15. You'll find also that in Revelation chapter 13, there is a number that's given. It is 666. You can see that at the end of the chapter there. But what's also interesting is in the book of Daniel, the very first part of the chapter, in fact, the very first verse, you'll read about an image that is 60 cubits high, and the breadth thereof is 6 cubits. Now, it doesn't give the depth, but if there is a 60 cubit high image that has the breadth of 6 cubits, then you would imagine that the depth would be about 6 cubits as well. And so just by coming to that conclusion, you can realize there's a number there in Daniel as well. And it would be 60, or 6 and 6 and 6. And so I think that's fascinating that we can see all these parallels between Daniel 3 and Revelation 13. Now I want to read a verse in Daniel chapter 3. It's verse 25. It says, "He answered and said, Lo, I see 4 men loose," this is the king, "walking in the midst of the fire, and they have no hurt, and the form of the fourth is like the Son of God. Okay, wait a minute. Now I have a question. If we're looking at an end-time scenario that reflects perfectly something that has not yet come to pass, Revelation 13 verses 11 through 18, but will be coming to pass soon. If we're looking at Daniel 3 that has those incredible parallels, we're actually looking at history that will repeat itself. So my question is, in this end-time scenario of Daniel chapter 3, why do we see a heathen king that knows about the Son of God? Why didn't he say, that looks like an angel? Why didn't he say, that looks like it's something miraculous? Why didn't he say, that looks like God himself? Well, because one of the messages that was being proclaimed by the three Hebrews and Daniel, who was somewhere at this time we don't know of, one of the messages they were proclaiming was that God the Father has a son. And that son, according to Daniel chapter 9, would soon be coming. Now, of course, Daniel 9 wasn't in existence yet, because Daniel 3 was chronologically before the vision of Daniel 9 was. But certainly, we can know that God was witnessing through those people, Daniel and his three Hebrew friends, to everybody around them about God and about God having a son. Notice what it says in Prophets and Kings, page 509.2. How did that heathen king know what the Son of God was like? The Hebrew captives, filling positions of trust in Babylon, had in life and character represented before him the truth. The truth of what? Well, the truth about the Son of God, like it says in the previous sentence. When asked for a reason of their faith in God that has an only begotten Son, they had given it without hesitation. Plainly and simply, they had presented the principles of righteousness, thus teaching those around them of the God whom they worshipped. That God has a son. Notice what it says. They told of Christ, the Redeemer to come. And in the form of the fourth, in the midst of the fire, the king recognized the one they had been talking about, the Son of God. I think that is very telling. You see, at the end of time, we, right now, right before the images set up and the persecution and the worship and the miracles and all these things, fire coming down from heaven, right before that occurs, we must be understanding, as the Hebrews were before, in that small minority remnant group, the truth about God the Father and his Son. Notice another one in Daniel chapter 7, verses 13 through 14. A similar experience is given, except you'll notice a little bit of wording difference. It says there in Daniel 7, verses 13 through 14, I saw in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man. Notice it doesn't say the Son of God. One like the Son of Man came with the clouds of heaven and came to the Ancient of Days. And they, the clouds, brought him near before him. That's they brought the Son of Man before or near before the Father. Now, before I go talking about this verse much more, I want to read a couple of verses in the Psalms. The first one is from Psalm 104 and verse 3. It says, Who maketh the clouds his chariot? The next one is Psalm 68:17. The chariots of God are 20,000, even thousands of angels. And so according to these verses, you can see that the clouds of heaven that brought the Son of Man to the Ancient of Days were actually angels. The Bible, when you put a couple of verses together, you realize angels brought Jesus Christ to the Father. Right there in Daniel chapter 7. And so, but I want to ask the question, why in the world was this section of Daniel different in that it called Jesus the Son of Man, whereas in Daniel 3 it called him the Son of God? I'd like to give this as a suggestion. Daniel 3 was a time where Daniel, chronologically, hadn't yet been given the vision of Daniel chapter 7, and he hadn't known about the 2300 days of Daniel chapter 8. Daniel 7 and 8 help us understand that when you come to the end of that 2300 day period, which are years according to Bible prophecy, ended in 1844, we know that the Son of God, moved, and Son of Man at the time, moved from the holy place into the most holy place. Now what's fascinating about that is that during Daniel chapter 3, this is before the advent of the Lord, Daniel referred to, and the king, and Daniel and the three Hebrews referred to the king, that God had a son. He was called the Son of God. But notice, when the end of the 2300 days came in 1844, that was after the time that Christ was incarnate. He was human. He had already ascended to heaven and had been doing ministry as the Son of Man for many, many years. And so when Daniel saw Jesus Christ in Daniel chapter 7, verses 13 and 14, he didn't see the Son of God, though he did. What he saw, though, was the Son of Man, because now at this time, in 1844, Jesus was human. And it was after the incarnation there of during the time that he became a human. So incredible just to be able to see the difference between the Son of God and the Son of Man there in Daniel chapter 3 and Daniel chapter 7. Now, notice this quote from the Great Controversy, page 479.3. It says, "The coming of Christ here described that's in Daniel chapter 7, verses 13 through 14, is not his coming to the earth. He comes to the Ancient of Days in heaven to receive dominion and glory and a kingdom." Wait a minute. You mean he hadn't had that same dominion and that same glory and that same kingdom before? That must have been what happened. "Which will be given him at the close of his work as a mediator." So he'll be given this dominion, glory, and kingdom at the close of his work. That's, of course, when he comes the second time. It is this coming, and not his second advent to the earth, that was foretold in prophecy to take place at the termination of the 2300 days in 1844. Attended by heavenly angels, according to the Bible, we read them as clouds, right? But we're told, attended by heavenly angels, our great high priest enters the Holy of Holies, and there appears in the presence of God to engage in the last acts of his ministration in behalf of man, to perform the work of investigative judgment, and to make an atonement for all who are shown to be entitled to its benefits. So I think it absolutely incredible that Daniel exposes, and Daniel and his three friends, exposes to the king, a heathen king, the truth about God the Father and his Son in an end-time scenario so absolutely connected to Revelation 13 that there's no way of saying that the truth about the Son of God is not an end-time truth that needs to be understood. So I bring to you, in this Jesus or Barabbas series, the truth that Jesus Christ is not only the Son of God, but he's also the Son of Man. And that means that he has a father before he came, and of course that same father gave him birth through Mary, the Virgin, during the time of his incarnation. So it is my pleasure to ask you to continue to pray for us, and thank you for financial support.